And it's the 100th Welcome to Mystara video, and I thought I should explain to the newer players why Mystara is the best setting for Dungeons & Dragons, as scientifically proven, far superior to other settings that we've been mistakenly fixated on for all these years. Mystara's popularity is on a bit of an upswing. What started out as a joking aside on a podcast has turned into a genuine interest into the setting. So let's start singing the praises of the best setting in Dungeons & Dragons. I'm Mr. Welch, and welcome to the 100th episode of Welcome to Mystara. The first thing you will notice about Mystara is the massive variety of different cultures. I'm not talking about generic fantasy cultures that are almost interchangeable except for a few standouts in a setting like Greyhawk has. I'm talking about if you walk from Vestland to Yalarum to Thyatis, you will encounter 3 very different cultures with recognizable customs, different styles of dress, languages, and even cultural holidays. Mystara cheats by having the cultures largely based on real-world nations, but it's the sheer variety of real-world cultures that makes it special. You've got Western European nations like France and Spain, Eastern European nations like the Balkans or Romania, Asian cultures like Mongolia, far-flung nations like the islands of Polynesia or Melanesia, and of course the American Indian cultures feature heavily in their own book. Get outside the known world, you get fantasy versions of India, Brazil, Australia, Texas, and Central Africa. Don't even get me started on the Hollow World cultures ranging from ancient Egypt to punk rock elves to Swiss dwarves. Humans aren't boring in Mystara because their cultures are a mishmash of real-world cultures, but thrown together randomly for massive culture clash. And it doesn't stop with the human cultures. While the dwarves and the Hen have only one playable sub-race, they are different from the other settings. Back when Dragonlance was creating Tinker Gnomes that became the standard across the multiverse, Mystara was leaving the construction projects to the dwarves, who were a lot like the Tinker Gnomes, only much more serious and way more competent. Then you have the unplayable Modrigswarg as the other surface dwarves with their twisted bodies and their cursed artifacts they craft like they were Lego blocks. The Mystara Hen aren't the default hobbits like other settings. They can be. The older a halfling gets, the more they want to settle down. But when the Hen are in their young adult years, they're a lot less like Bilbo Baggins in his hobbit hole and more like a sawed-off version of Tony Hawk with a disturbing lack of self-preservation. If you're playing a Hen, you're playing a Yalaran. Nobody makes fun of Hen in Mystara because the entire race has an undeniable urge when they are young to go out and get all their adventuring done before they have to start worrying about paying a mortgage and looking for colleges. When it comes to elves, Mystara has possibly more versions than any other setting. Sure, we've got the stock Sylvan elves and Alfheim and Windar, but you've also got the Spanish Bel Cadiz elves, the nautical water elves of Minrathat, flying Eeyar near the Savage Coast. We replace the boring and cliched drow with the optimistic yet naive shadow elves. Even when you have 2 races of elves in one nation like Minrathat has with their water elves and their wood elves, they're still very unique cultures. When it comes to gnome, you've got the stock ground gnomes, which are a strange cross of Santa's Workshop and Chase Morgan, but you've also got the flying city of Serene. While the Kryn gnomes are building catapults instead of elevators, our gnomes are building magic-powered biplanes. That leads me to my next major point of why Mystara is awesome. You're already familiar with it. I don't have to explain what the Principality of Clantyr is like to someone unfamiliar with the setting like I would have to explain the nation of Fae in the Forgotten Realms. I just tell them it's Scotland, with evil wizards and undead roaming the moors. They already know how to play in Scotland. The fantasy imagery is just an added bonus. For new players, it gives them a stereotype they can associate with, and then everything else you add is window dressing. Keramikos is largely the backwoods of Eastern Europe. You just have to add Byzantine rulers. The Soldier for Jarlduns are 12th century Vikings with actual runic magic. Cimarron is the Republic of Texas, just with pistol-packing dwarves riding glyptodons instead of horses. It's a lot easier to explain the setting when the players already know the references. Sure, you get to explain the more fantasy elements, but if you want immersion, Mystara does most of your work for you. When a player says, "I'm from Ethengar," the other player know that they're playing a Mongolian. It's a major help all the way around. When it comes to how the setting was released, Mystara alone was created by releasing the setting books individually of each other, rather than a box set that just gives a taste. So instead of getting a few paragraphs on the Nation of Darkon and the Ravenloft box set while you wait for more information on it, Mystara says, here, have a massive comprehensive guide to everything you need to know about Keramikos. And next month we'll give you one on Yalarum, and then Glantry, and so on. Back in the 80s, this led to you having to wait to learn about future nations later on, but in TSR's defense, they blew up the Gazetteer in an insane amount of time. In just 2 years, all the books were released, and Mystara's known world was the most fleshed out line of any of the settings. It would take years from Forgotten Realms to catch up on the amount of detail Mystara has. When you got your book, it told you everything you needed to know, not just how to play as that nationality, but how to play in that nation. You get an extensive explanation in Darrican and Minrathat on how the world economy works. Irindi will fill you in on everything that happens when you go on vacation. Each world book fills in another aspect of the setting, not just with information on the nation, but it includes how the world fits together. The criminal justice systems get fully fleshed out. Each nation has a unique take on how to punish people, from Rockholm's creative anti-slavery, where the victim is prohibited from working at all, to the Shires requiring quests to redeem the convicted, to Glantry's highly creative and horrifically sadistic punishments. You don't just get snippets of what it's like in each nation, you learn what life entails from the kings all the way down to the beggars. The next thing that makes Mystara awesome is that it's actually multiple interconnected areas, but each area has its own style and vibe. The known world is akin to Europe, with multiple distinct nations crammed together at each other's borders, and having to figure out how to live peacefully while two massive empires right next to them threaten to level everything in a final massive war. Head west and you have the Serpent Peninsula, where nations try to survive in an area inhospitable to life, or trying to hold off the expansionist armies of the Master of Hool. Then you go to the Red Steel setting, where a thrice-cursed people eke out a living while trying to acquire the magic mineral that keeps them from mutating to death. Red Steel combined high fantasy with primitive firearms to give it a Wild West theme, along with throwing in several more nations just outside of the cursed region and a large amount of unexplored regions. And only then does it get weird. You can travel to the center of the world where a massive hollowed-out preserve saves a large number of cultures that were going to be extinct on the surface. You can find ancient Greeks, ancient Egyptians, mutated beastmen, merry pirates, tribal Africans, futuristic elves, and dozens more, all trapped in a social stasis at the whims of the immortals. There you've got floating continents around a giant red sun with everyone on the inside of the world looking up at it. Magic doesn't work the same, and cultures are permanently stagnant by design. Then going way back, I mean back to the beginning, you have Blackmoor. Dave's baby is a part of Mystara, a breakaway province of an ancient empire surrounded by enemies on all sides. It starts out with a standard fantasy, but then it adds in the City of Gods, and suddenly Blackmoor's greatest enemy and strongest ally are members of a crashed starship, turning low fantasy into pure magitech. Plus, adventuring in the Doom setting gives the players a sense of foreboding, even if the Great Reign of Fire is 1,000 years in the future when Blackmoor blows itself off the map. Now, when it comes to the people that created Mystara, you're not going to get a better pedigree. Dave gave us Blackmoor. Frank Mensor wrote the rules for the setting. Bruce Hurd threw it together. Aaron Alston created the known world alongside Lawrence Schick, who gave D&D the White Plume Mountain. Zeb Cook and Tom Moldvay gave us so many memorable adventures that together they dominated the list of best modules. Carl Sargent and Jim Bambra and their works still stand up to the test of time. Even Ed Greenwood and Monty Cook contributed their talents to the Mystara line. When it comes to the art, you've got Clyde Caldwell right alongside of Larry Elmore, Valerie Valasek, and Jeff Easley. When people think of D&D art, they think of the Gazetteer covers. The hex-based maps have their own cult following as people try to tweak them to perfection and argue about minor corrections or justify geographic oddities. Great art and great writers are a luxury that few other settings can claim, and Mystara proudly boasts about both of them. There hasn't been an official Mystara product since 1996. It's my intention to change this by increasing the visibility of the setting and introducing younger players to the world and its nations. Helping me in this endeavor are a lot of people. Go check out the Vaults of Pandius, filled with over 20 years' worth of fan-created editions. Threshold Magazine introduces new settings, adventures, and backgrounds on a regular basis. Thorfinn Tate's Cartography has all the original maps updated and corrected to eliminate continuity problems between the products. We all may be grognards, but we love to introduce the setting to newer players, and fresh blood into the fan base is always welcomed and encouraged. Of note, for the old guard, is when we do have disagreements, it's settled over on the Mystara Reborn Facebook page or on the Piazza forums. You're not going to have flame wars. More likely you're going to see formal debates complete with heavily sourced arguments and generally both sides reaching a consensus. It's almost never, your opinion sucks, I'm right, so shut up, like in the larger RPG forums. It's more like, I will concede on points 3, 7, 14, 16, 18, 34, 41, 48, only regarding line 3 in paragraph 7, of course, and 57. However, I stand firm on points 4, 9, 13, 20, 24, 28, and 52. Mystara fans love their setting and are some of the most approachable, especially with the TSR Old Guard occasionally popping in to answer your questions themselves. While Mystara isn't the best-known setting, it's one of the oldest. In print, it made its first appearance in 1981 with the Isle of Dread, 4 years before Forgotten Realms made its official debut. That makes it the second oldest setting published by TSR, only behind Greyhawk. The difference was Mystara was regular D&D, where Greyhawk was advanced D&D. So when the setting started to be expanded, it evolved separately from the other D&D settings. Greyhawk has the cliched Drow Elves, Mystara has the fresh and original Shadow Elves. Greyhawk has the boring old Tabasti, Mystara has the much better written and superior Rakasta. When Forgotten Realms replaced Greyhawk, they decided to steal everything from Greyhawk, leaving Mystara unique and able to grow without Forgotten Realms pillaging it for ideas. Because of that, you're going to find a lot of new and original monsters for beginning players, even while the monsters themselves have been around for decades. Where other settings, especially in 5th edition, have decided to go magic light, parts of Mystara go in the exact opposite direction by saturating themselves with the arcane. Alphatia is filled with wonders like flying nations, skyships, and undersea kingdoms. Glantry goes all in with magic-based utilities, public services, and even magical department stores. Only in Glantry can you visit in the heart of Belcadee City Crazy Carlos's used golem emporium for all of your magical construct needs. Here we have a magnificent selection of all of our traditional golems from flesh to iron, as well as a lovely selection of more specialized Mystaran golems like our discounted wood golems, beautiful amber golems, and for those wanting something special, check out our new line of talking obsidian golems. Check out our balloon animal golems for the kiddos. And on special occasions we have a plethora of piñata golems that you can fill yourself. They ain't got nothing on Glantry. I've mentioned this before, and it has to be repeated, but each of the 10 primary D&D settings had their own specialty. For Mystara, it was exploration and world building, where Forgotten Realms was often criticized for being too fleshed out with nothing to explore, which was one of the listed reasons why they went to 4th edition and nuked Forgotten Realms. Mystara has its realistic cities, with the larger cities on the coast and the trade routes, and the cities getting smaller as they got away from the well-traveled roads. But across most of the nation, there are vast amounts of wilderness hiding all sorts of monsters and hidden dungeons. Karamikos has the masterpiece Night's Dark Terror. Yularum gives you the Lost City in the middle of their vast desert. Even peaceful Irindi is just above the largely unknown Thanagoeth archipelago, and not far from the renowned Isle of Dread. Gives you the best of both worlds. Solve the mystery of the Veiled Society in the middle of urban Specularum, and then go 100 miles inland and find the hidden valley of the Hutaka that's been undiscovered for centuries. The beauty of having all this unexplored wilderness set in nations is that it allowed players to establish themselves in the game world as nobles and power players within the setting without displacing anyone or upsetting storylines. The module Test of the Warlords is set up specifically for players to create their own domains and become nobles in their own right. Mystara revisits this premise in the Legacy of Blood, only going from distant Norwold into normally civil Darrakin, which, despite being largely tranquil, has large swaths that are contested by orcs and other humanoids. Mystara not only allowed the players to rise in the rank of nobility in the guilds of the world, it expects them to do just that. In fact, if you take it to the furthest extreme of what Mystara allows you to do, you can ascend into immortality as you become an immortal, a kind of demigod. Now, that's extremely tough. It requires you to play for a huge long time, but if you do it right, you get to become this somewhat godlike character and become part of the world that way. You're not going to find many of the other 9 settings listing in the reasons why you want to play in that setting is, oh, you also get to become a god. There is a common complaint in a lot of settings that NPCs dwarf the achievement of characters, and the characters are running side quests while the canon characters do all the cool stuff. Case in point, the Time of Trilogy modules. Even in 5th edition, you constantly run into heavily established characters no matter where you go. Mystara never had that problem. The iconic characters you meet aren't necessary to the story most of the time, and none of them are ever overpowering when you come across them. If you meet a character that's established, it's more likely you're going to be playing the big damn heroes than being the ones needing rescuing, like the module Scarred as Mirror, where you show up and save Stephen Karamikos, and you even get to fight back-to-back with him for a short period of time. Most of the powerful NPCs are busy minding their own affairs. If you do meet them, it's in an official capacity, like if you met Emperor Thincold in Red Arrow Black Shield. You show up, you give him your case, he slaps you on the head and says, here you go, this is what I need you to do. Mystara isn't going to overshadow you with escort missions or DMPCs that all you're going to do is want to murder in their sleep. Chalk that aspect of the setting up to the Hall of Fame caliber of the writers. Last reason why Mystara is so much better than everything else is Mystara was built for your players to discover. While it gives you a lot of information on the 5 fleshed out areas, including the distant past setting of Blackmoor, it hints at so much more with maps in its lore. There's 2 additional continents that explore that are just given a brief description with the Voyage of the Princess Ark and the Dawn of the Emperors. Everything else is left for you to define. Even the Hollow World, which gives you a large amount of information on what's there, is barely a quarter of what's actually on the Hollow World floor, so you can fill in whatever you want. There's large portions of the continent of Brune left undefined. They have a lot of nations from the original map, like the Empire of the Great Khan, the Matriarchy of Peloton, and the island of Zixol that just exist on the map. Maybe they're good guys, maybe they're bad guys. I guess we'll never get to know, because you're going to explore them. Some settings have distant lands that never get more than a passing mention, like the Forgotten Realms, Anchorome, or Kryn's Atlantum, and that never get anything more than that. Mystara does partially fill in the map, but it doesn't do it for you. Somewhere on those continents is a 1,000-mile across radioactive crater that is Blackmoor now. That's up to you to find. While the known world is well written, the unknown world is well outlined. It's up to you to fill in the blanks. So those are the reasons why Mystara is the best D&D setting ever written. It's fleshed out, but leaves room for the players to explore. The players can elevate themselves to be more than just murder hobos. They can actually become part of the lore in the game. They can even become part of the pantheons that rule over the world. It has its own background, shares very little with the monsters of other settings, making it the most unique with what you're going to play. It offers multiple styles of play, from the gritty survival of the Serpent Peninsula to the overtop magitech of Top Ballista's Serene and everything in between. This is why Mystara needs to come back. It's earned it. I'm linking all the stuff I talked about in the comments, as well as the Twitter feed that I finally started to post to so people can follow Mystara. If you listen to the podcast and they ask about settings, mention Mystara. Bring it up on live feeds. Show Wizards there's a demand for the product. That's the only way we're ever going to get the comeback. Share this video. Introduce it to your friends. Spread the news and get people interested. I've got one book written for the setting. I wouldn't mind writing another one. Dozen or so. Next week, back to the modules with the second Immortal module, Wrath of the Olympus. So until next time, remember, spread this around and like the channels. People notice channels with followers. That way I'm not some madman ranting at the wind. I'm some madman ranting at the crowds.